Sunday, August 16th, 2026. Welcome back. And today we need to talk about something that happened just hours ago on the other side of the world. Something that has already killed dozens of people, triggered a tsunami warning across 4 provinces, and reminded every scientist watching the Pacific Ring of Fire that this planet is nowhere near finished shaking. A magnitude 7. 7 earthquake just slammed into Indonesia. It struck off the coast of Flores Island in the early hours of the morning, while most people were still asleep in their homes, still hours away from waking up to an ordinary Saturday. Within minutes, a tsunami warning was issued across an area home to millions of people. Within hours, buildings had collapsed, roads had disappeared under landslides, entire villages had gone dark, and a death toll that started in single digits climbed past 20, then past 30, then past 40, with officials openly warning that the number is still expected to rise. This is not a distant statistic you can glance at and move past. This is an active, unfolding disaster in one of the most densely populated and most seismically dangerous archipelagos on the entire planet. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what happened, minute by minute, why this exact stretch of coastline is so violently prone to this kind of event, what the historical seismic record of this region actually tells us, and why what just happened in Indonesia matters far beyond its own coastline, whether you live nearby or thousands of miles away. Let's start with the raw sequence of events, because the timeline here matters enormously. According to the United States Geological Survey, the earthquake struck at 5:58 in the morning local time on Saturday, August 15th, 2026. The epicenter was located roughly 68 kilometers, or about 42 miles, north-northwest of the city of Enda, in East Nusa Tenggara province, positioned in the waters just off the northern coast of Flores Island. The depth of the rupture was measured at approximately 10 kilometers, just over 6 miles beneath the seafloor. That depth is not a minor technical detail. It is one of the single most important factors in understanding why this earthquake did the damage it did. When a fault ruptures at a shallow depth like this, there is very little rock mass sitting between the point of rupture and the surface to absorb or dampen the seismic energy before it reaches homes, roads, and human bodies. A deep earthquake of the same magnitude might barely register as a strong tremor at the surface. A shallow one hits like a hammer. This is a large part of why the destruction across Flores was so immediate and so severe within seconds of the ground beginning to move. Within moments of the initial rupture, Indonesia's Agency for Meteorology, Climatology, and Geophysics, known by its Indonesian acronym BMKG, issued an early tsunami warning covering West Nusa Tenggara, East Nusa Tenggara, South Sulawesi, and Southeast Sulawesi, 4 separate provinces. Millions of people placed under warning simultaneously in the space of minutes. Residents along the coastline were instructed to move immediately away from beaches and riverbanks and head for higher ground without waiting for further confirmation. In the town of Nagakeo, roughly 2,000 residents undertook what officials later described as self-evacuation, meaning they did not wait to be told twice. They felt the violence of the shaking, they understood instinctively what it likely meant, and they ran for elevation before any official alert had even fully reached them. That single instinct, built from decades of hard-earned regional memory about what earthquakes here can do, almost certainly saved lives on Saturday morning. And the tsunami threat was not theoretical. Waves were recorded at over half a meter, more than 1.5 feet, in Bulukumba in South Sulawesi and in Sapi in the Bima Regency. That is not the kind of towering wall of water that erases a coastline in an instant, but it is more than enough to sweep a person off their feet, destroy small boats and coastal structures, and confirm without any doubt that the seafloor beneath the earthquake had genuinely displaced. The tsunami warning was eventually lifted several hours later, and Australia's own Tsunami Warning Centre separately confirmed there was no threat to the Australian mainland or its outlying territories. But the lifting of a warning does not undo whatever damage had already occurred on shore in the chaotic minutes before it. And this earthquake did not arrive alone. More than 230 aftershocks rattled Flores Island throughout the day, the strongest among them reaching magnitude 6.2, an earthquake that, on its own, in most parts of the world, would be considered a major and highly damaging seismic event in its own right. Later that same Saturday, a completely separate magnitude 6. 9 earthquakes struck Indonesia's western Sumatra island, thousands of kilometers away from Flores. That Sumatra earthquake occurred at a depth of over 172 kilometers, more than 107 miles beneath the surface, which is precisely why it caused no casualties or significant surface damage despite its considerable size. The sheer depth swallowed almost all of its destructive potential before it ever reached the surface. But sit with what it means that 2 separate major earthquakes on opposite ends of this island nation occurred within the same 24-hour window. Indonesia is a country of more than 270 million people spread across roughly 17,000 islands. And on this single Saturday, multiple sections of its underlying tectonic architecture were releasing accumulated stress at nearly the same moment, hundreds of miles apart. Now let's talk about the human cost, because behind every one of these numbers is a family, a home, and a community that will never be the same again. As of the most recent update from Indonesia's National Disaster Management Agency, known as BNPB, at least 47 people have been confirmed dead. Around 50 more have been injured, some of them severely enough to require hospital transport by helicopter. The death toll climbed in visible stages throughout the day, and the way it climbed tells its own story. Early reports out of the region put the confirmed number at 2. Within a few hours, it had risen to 14, then 20, then 38, then 47. Officials have been explicit and unambiguous that they expect this number to continue rising in the coming days. And the reason behind that grim expectation is almost as disturbing as the death toll itself. Rescue teams have not even been able to physically reach some of the hardest hit areas yet. Nagakeo Regency, the region closest to the epicenter, remains largely cut off from the outside world as of this recording. Landslides triggered by the violent shaking have blocked the Trans-Flores Highway, a roughly 700-kilometer, 435-mile mountain road that serves as the single primary artery connecting communities across the entire length of the island, running from Labuan Bajo in the west all the way to Larantuka in the east. With that road severed, rescue crews have had to attempt to reach Nagakeo by boat instead, navigating the coastline because the normal land route simply does not exist right now in any usable form. Local police officials in East Nusa Tenggara have said that widespread power outages are compounding an already difficult crisis, disrupting the flow of accurate information about where the damage is worst and where survivors might still be trapped beneath collapsed structures. Communication towers in several areas have gone down entirely. In Nagakeo Regency alone, telecommunications regulators confirmed that multiple cell towers were physically damaged, cutting off phone and data access for roughly 12,000 residents at the precise moment they most needed to call for help, or simply tell their families somewhere else on the island that they were still alive. Try to picture that for a moment. An earthquake violent enough to level your home, followed immediately by the terrifying realization that you cannot call anyone, that no one outside your immediate surroundings knows whether you survived, and that the road connecting you to medical help and rescue equipment has been buried under rock and mud. That is the layered reality unfolding on Flores Island right now, not in a textbook description of disaster response, but in real time this weekend. The physical damage on the ground has been extensive and is still being fully cataloged. BNPB's ongoing assessments show at least 346 houses damaged, including 157 that were severely damaged or destroyed outright, 41 moderately damaged, and 148 more with lighter but still meaningful structural damage. But this is not only about homes. The earthquake also struck 87 educational facilities, 18 health facilities, 5 places of worship, and 6 government buildings. Think about what that actually means in practical human terms. Schools that children were supposed to walk into on Monday morning are now compromised structures, some of them unsafe to enter at all. Health facilities that are supposed to be treating the earthquake's own injured are themselves damaged and operating at reduced capacity, if they are operating at all. This is the layered, compounding nature of a major seismic disaster that gets lost when people only look at a single death toll number. It does not simply knock down buildings and then stop. It disables the very infrastructure a community depends on to respond to the disaster in the first place, at the exact moment that infrastructure is needed the most. Survivors have described the terror of those first seconds in vivid, visceral terms that are worth sitting with. One resident of Talabura village, a woman in her 50s, told reporters the quake was massive, an unmistakable shock so strong there was no doubt in her mind about what was happening the instant it began. A 16-year-old living in the region said he had never felt anything close to it in his entire life, that he was sound asleep when it hit, and that he ran immediately toward higher ground, still in a state of panic. Hours later, telling reporters he was still shaking, still worried, unable to fully process what had just happened to his home and his town. These are not abstract seismic statistics scrolling past on a screen. These are people who woke up to their entire physical world moving violently beneath them with no warning at all, nothing but the sudden overwhelming motion of the ground itself telling them that something catastrophic was underway. So why does Indonesia keep experiencing earthquakes at this scale, over and over again, decade after decade, seemingly without end? To understand that, you have to understand exactly where this country sits on the surface of the planet. Indonesia occupies one of the most tectonically volatile positions on Earth. It sits directly on the Pacific Ring of Fire, the horseshoe-shaped belt of fault lines and volcanoes that wraps around the edges of the Pacific Ocean, stretching from the western coast of the Americas, up through Alaska, down through Japan, and through the entirety of Southeast Asia before curving back around. This is the zone responsible for the overwhelming majority of the world's earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, and Indonesia sits at one of its most complex, most active junctions. The archipelago is caught directly in the collision zone between several major tectonic plates, including the Indo-Australian Plate, the Eurasian Plate, and the Pacific Plate. alongside a collection of smaller microplates that make the regional geology extraordinarily complicated, even by the standards of active tectonic boundaries elsewhere in the world. In the specific area around Flores, the seismic hazard comes primarily from what geologists call the Flores back-arc thrust system, a zone where the crust is being compressed and forced upward as tectonic plates grind against one another beneath the Flores Sea. This is fundamentally different from a simple strike-slip fault, where two blocks of crust slide horizontally past each other, the way faults in places like California typically behave. A thrust fault, instead, involves one slab of crust being forced up and over another, and when that kind of fault ruptures suddenly and violently, it can displace an enormous volume of the seafloor either sharply upward or sharply downward in a matter of seconds. That vertical displacement of the ocean floor is exactly the mechanism that generates a tsunami. The water sitting above the ruptured seafloor gets shoved abruptly upward, and that displaced energy radiates outward in every direction as a wave. This is precisely the mechanism that triggered the tsunami warning within minutes of Saturday's earthquake, and it is the same mechanism responsible for nearly every major tsunami this region has ever experienced. And this is not new territory for Flores. This island carries a genuinely devastating seismic history that every resident along its coastline lives with, whether they consciously think about it every day or not. In December of 1992, a magnitude 7 earthquake, almost identical in size to the one that just struck this weekend, hit this same stretch of coastline and triggered a tsunami that killed approximately 2,500 people on Flores, with some estimates placing the true toll even higher once the surrounding region is accounted for. That disaster remains one of the deadliest earthquake and tsunami events in Indonesia's modern history, and it happened on this exact island, generated by this exact tectonic system, at an almost identical magnitude to what just occurred. When scientists and emergency planners first looked at Saturday's earthquake, the 1992 disaster was the immediate point of comparison, because the physical setup is so strikingly similar. The genuinely encouraging difference this time is that Indonesia's early warning systems and evacuation protocols have improved enormously over the past 3 decades. The tsunami warning that went out within minutes on Saturday, the immediate self-evacuation of thousands of residents in Nagakeo without waiting for official confirmation, these are direct, measurable products of the hard lessons learned from 1992. That improvement in warning infrastructure is very likely the single biggest reason the death toll from this earthquake, while genuinely tragic, has not approached anything close to the scale of the 1992 catastrophe on the same coastline. But Flores is far from the only chapter in Indonesia's long and brutal earthquake history. And it is worth understanding the fuller scope of what this country has endured to really appreciate why scientists take every one of these events so seriously, even the ones that do not make major international headlines. In September of 2018, a magnitude 7, 5 earthquakes struck near the city of Palu on the island of Sulawesi. That earthquake generated a large, highly localized tsunami that devastated coastal neighborhoods. But what made the Palu disaster especially horrifying was a secondary phenomenon known as liquefaction. The violent shaking caused water-saturated soil beneath entire residential districts to temporarily behave almost like a liquid, and whole neighborhoods were swallowed into the ground, homes and the people inside them disappearing into moving rivers of mud within minutes. That combination of earthquake, tsunami, and liquefaction killed more than 4,400 people in a single event. In October of 2010, a major earthquake near the Mentawai Islands off the western coast of Sumatra triggered a tsunami wave roughly 10 feet high that struck the coastline just minutes after the shaking stopped, giving residents almost no meaningful time to react or evacuate. More than 400 people were killed and hundreds of homes were destroyed in that disaster. And then there is the earthquake that fundamentally reshaped how the entire world thinks about tsunami risk and warning systems. In December of 2004, a massive magnitude 9, one earthquake ruptured off the coast of Sumatra in western Indonesia. It remains one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded on modern seismic instruments anywhere on Earth. The tsunami it generated killed approximately 230,000 people across a dozen countries bordering the Indian Ocean, with roughly 170,000 of those deaths occurring in Indonesia alone. That single catastrophic event fundamentally changed international tsunami warning systems, disaster response protocols, and coastal engineering standards across the entire region, and, in many ways, across the entire world. Every warning system that activated within minutes of Saturday's Flores earthquake exists, in a very direct and traceable sense, because of the institutional lessons burned into memory by that 2004 catastrophe. Even more recently, this region has continued to demonstrate just how relentlessly active it remains. In December of 2021, a magnitude 7, 3 earthquakes struck offshore north of Mamere in the Flores Sea at a depth of about 16 kilometers. That earthquake generated a smaller tsunami of about 7 centimeters, and it was followed by nearly 900 recorded aftershocks in less than a week. It caused 1 death and 173 injuries, And unlike this weekend's thrust rupture, it was a strike slip event, a fundamentally different rupture mechanism, showing that this region's underlying fault network is complex enough to produce multiple distinct types of major earthquakes within just a few years of one another. And earlier this same year, in April of 2026, a magnitude 7, 3 to 7, 4 earthquakes struck the Molucca Sea between North Sulawesi and North Maluku provinces at a depth of 35 kilometers. That earthquake generated a tsunami of 75 centimeters, damaged or destroyed more than 450 structures, the majority of them on the Batang Islands, and was followed by more than 1,300 recorded aftershocks. When you line all of these events up in sequence, the 1992 Flores disaster, the 2004 Sumatra megathrust, the 2010 Mentawai tsunami, the 2018 Palu earthquake and liquefaction catastrophe, the 2021 Flores sea rupture, the April 2026 Molucca Sea earthquake, and now this August 2026 event, you are not looking at a series of isolated, unrelated tragedies scattered randomly across the decades. You are looking at the continuous, ongoing behavior of one of the most seismically loaded plate boundary systems on the entire planet. This is simply what Indonesia's geology does again and again on a timescale that spans decades but genuinely never actually stops. It is worth pausing here to talk about something that connects this event to a much broader global picture, because Indonesia's earthquake this week did not occur in complete isolation from the rest of the planet's seismic activity this year. Researchers tracking cumulative global seismic energy release found that 2025 was one of the most seismically active years in modern recorded history, with the total energy released by earthquakes of magnitude 5 and greater reaching levels close to triple what was recorded in 2021, a year that was already considered highly active because of a cluster of 3 separate magnitude 8 or greater earthquakes striking in rapid succession. Just this month, back-to-back major earthquakes struck Venezuela, registering at magnitude 7.2 and magnitude 7.5, representing the strongest seismic activity the country has experienced since the year 1812. A magnitude 7, 3 struck Mexico, a magnitude 6. 3 hit north of New Zealand, another magnitude 6. 3 reactivated a fault zone in the Philippines that had previously ruptured at magnitude 7. 8. Northern California has been experiencing an unusual cluster of significant earthquakes on faults that had been historically quiet for decades. And now Indonesia, already one of the most seismically active countries on the planet to begin with, has just added a magnitude 7 rupture to that growing list. None of these individual earthquakes directly caused another one thousands of miles away, in some simple, linear chain of cause and effect. Earthquakes do not typically work that way across such enormous distances, but seismologists broadly agree that the planet's crust behaves as an interconnected system under continuously shifting stress, and that periods of globally elevated seismic energy release do tend to cluster together across multiple plate boundaries within compressed windows of time. Whether that reflects deeper mechanical connections in global plate tectonics, or simply the statistical clustering you would expect from a genuinely random process over a large enough sample, remains an active and honestly debated question among researchers. But the raw pattern of the data across 2025 and 2026 is not something scientists are casually dismissing. It is something being studied closely in real time as new events like this one continue to occur. Coming back specifically to Flores, let's talk about what happens in the hours and days immediately after an earthquake like this, because the earthquake itself is genuinely only the beginning of the disaster, not the whole story. The physical shaking itself lasts at most a minute or two, but the consequences unfold over days and weeks that follow. Right now, on Flores Island, rescue teams are working against a set of compounding obstacles that make every passing hour more dangerous for anyone still trapped beneath collapsed structures. The landslides that severed the Trans-Flores Highway did not just inconvenience travel across the island, they completely cut off entire communities from any ground-based access to emergency services, heavy rescue equipment, and basic medical supplies. Rescue officials have had to resort to boats to reach the closest hit regions, a far slower and more limited method than trucks and ambulances moving efficiently along an intact road network. Widespread power outages across the affected provinces have blinded emergency coordinators to the true scope of the damage, because without reliable electricity, without functioning cell towers, without a steady flow of accurate information moving from individual villages back to the Central Disaster Response Agency, officials are being forced to make life or death resource allocation decisions with an incomplete and constantly shifting picture. This is precisely why the death toll has been climbing in visible stages throughout the day, rather than being reported accurately in a single final number all at once. Every new region that rescue teams manage to physically reach reveals new casualties that had not yet been counted or even known about. USGS estimates suggest that more than 500,000 people on Flores Island alone likely experienced very strong shaking during this earthquake. with moderate to strong shaking, felt more broadly by several million additional people across the wider surrounding region. That is an enormous population exposed to a genuinely dangerous level of ground motion within the span of a few seconds. There's also a longer, slower crisis beginning right now that will not generate as many dramatic headlines as the immediate death toll, but that will shape the recovery of this region for months, if not years, to come. Nearly 200 houses have already been destroyed or severely damaged, and roughly 2,000 residents have already been forced into temporary shelters, uncertain of when or even whether they will be able to return home. Schools, health facilities, and places of worship, the very institutions a community relies on to function day to day and to heal after a disaster, have themselves been damaged in significant numbers. Rebuilding 87 educational facilities and 18 health facilities is not a project measured in days or even weeks. It is a project measured in years, and it happens in a region where infrastructure was already stretched thin by the sheer geographic complexity of an archipelago made up of thousands of scattered islands, many of them remote and difficult to reach, even under normal circumstances. Indonesian officials have been explicit about just how difficult logistics are in this specific disaster. The head of the National Search and Rescue Agency noted publicly that East Nusa Tenggara's geography, consisting of numerous scattered islands, presents enormous transportation and access challenges for any large-scale emergency response effort. Helicopters and rescue vessels have been deployed specifically because ground transportation has proven so unreliable even in ordinary times, let alone after a major earthquake has triggered landslides across the region's single primary highway corridor. Now, it would be easy to watch a story like this unfold on the other side of the world and feel like it has nothing meaningful to do with your own life if you don't happen to live in Indonesia. But that reaction genuinely misses something important about why an event like this deserves real attention rather than a quick scroll past on your feed. First, there's the simple matter of scale and recurrence. This is not the first major earthquake to strike this exact region, and based on the geological record stretching back decades and even centuries, it will not be the last. The tectonic forces that produced the 1992 disaster, the 2004 megathrust, the 2018 Palu earthquake, and now this weekend's event are not going anywhere. They are the permanent, ongoing product of tectonic plates that are still actively colliding, still grinding against one another, still accumulating stress that has to be released somewhere, at some point, on some fault, whether that is next year or next century. Second, this event is a live, real-time demonstration of exactly how a major earthquake actually unfolds in the real world, not in a computer model, not in a theoretical simulation, but in the genuinely messy, chaotic, communication-disrupted reality of an actual disaster response. Warnings went out fast. Thousands of people evacuated fast, on pure instinct. And still, buildings collapsed. An entire highway disappeared under landslides. And rescue teams are struggling right now, in this exact moment, to reach the people who need them most. That is the honest, unfiltered picture of what a major seismic event looks like, even in a country with far more direct earthquake experience and far more developed warning infrastructure than most places on Earth. And third, and maybe most importantly of all, this event is a direct, current reminder of exactly what preparation actually accomplishes, and just as importantly, what it cannot accomplish. The improvements Indonesia has made since 1992, the tsunami warning system that activated within minutes, the deeply ingrained instinct among residents to self-evacuate without waiting for official confirmation, almost certainly kept the death toll from this earthquake dramatically lower than it otherwise would have been. That is not a small thing. That is the tangible, measurable difference between a functioning warning system existing and one not existing at all. But preparation did not stop buildings from collapsing. It did not stop landslides from severing an entire island's primary highway. It did not stop power and communication networks from failing at the exact moment they were needed most desperately. Preparation reduces harm. It does not eliminate it entirely. And that distinction matters no matter where you personally live, because it is the same distinction that applies to every seismically active region on the planet, including places much closer to home for most people watching this right now. If you live anywhere near a known active fault system, anywhere along the broader Pacific Ring of Fire, anywhere that geological surveys have already identified as carrying meaningful earthquake risk, this is not a story to feel briefly sorry about and then move past. It is a live, unfolding demonstration of what actually happens when the ground moves without warning, and what the real, measurable difference between preparedness and unpreparedness looks like in human terms. So, what does meaningful preparation actually look like in practical, concrete terms for anyone watching this who genuinely takes earthquake risk seriously, wherever they happen to live? It starts with knowing your specific exposure. If you live in a seismically active region, take the time to find out which fault systems are nearest to you and what hazard level has been officially assigned to them by geological surveys in your area. Build an emergency kit capable of sustaining your household for at least 72 hours without any outside help water, non-perishable food, a first aid kit, a battery-powered or hand-crank radio, flashlights, and copies of critical personal documents kept somewhere easily accessible. Think through how you would communicate with family members if cell towers went down entirely. Because, as we just watched happen in Nagakeo Regency this weekend, that is not a distant hypothetical risk. It is exactly what occurred within hours of this earthquake striking. Understand the evacuation routes near your home well enough that you would not need a working phone or an intact road to reach higher ground if you happen to live near a coastline. And if you are in any position to advocate for, or personally invest in, structural improvements. And whether that means retrofitting an older building or supporting stronger regional infrastructure and evacuation planning in your community, those are precisely the kinds of investments that separated the outcome of Saturday's earthquake from the outcome of the far deadlier 1992 disaster on that same coastline. None of this is about living in a constant state of fear. Panic has never helped anyone, and it never will. But genuine, practical, unglamorous preparation is the single factor that has repeatedly made the difference, again and again across Indonesia's own recent history, between a seismic event that kills thousands of people and one that, while still deeply tragic, kills dramatically fewer. As of right now, the situation on Flores Island remains actively unfolding, not resolved, not finished, still developing hour by hour. Rescue teams are still working to reach communities cut off by landslides. The death toll, currently standing at 47, is expected by officials to climb further as more remote areas gradually become accessible. Thousands of residents remain in temporary shelters tonight, uncertain of when, or even whether, they will be able to return to homes that no longer exist in any usable form. And beneath all of it, the same tectonic forces that produced Saturday's magnitude 7. 7 rupture continue grinding along the Flores back arc thrust system and the broader network of interconnected faults that define Indonesia's precarious place on the Ring of Fire, exactly as they have for millions of years, and exactly as they will continue to for millions more, indifferent to human timelines, human plans, or human readiness. The story of this earthquake is not finished. It is being written right now in the search and rescue operations still underway on the ground, in the aftershocks still rattling the island, and in the long, difficult, expensive recovery that is only just beginning for hundreds of thousands of people across East Nusa Tenggara and the surrounding provinces. If this kind of deep, honest breakdown of what is actually happening in the world's most seismically active regions matters to you, take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe, because these are the stories that genuinely deserve real, sustained attention, not just a passing headline that disappears from the news cycle in 48 hours. Drop a comment with your thoughts below, especially if you have any personal connection to this region, or if you have lived through a major earthquake yourself, because those first-hand accounts genuinely add something real to this conversation that statistics alone cannot capture. And if you know anyone who lives in or has family in Indonesia, or anywhere along the wider Pacific Ring of Fire, take a moment to share this with them, because staying genuinely informed about exactly how these disasters unfold in real time, and exactly what preparation does and does not accomplish, is one of the most useful and practical things any of us can do for the people we actually care about. The ground beneath Flores Island moved violently in the early hours of Saturday morning, and in a matter of seconds, it changed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people who had no warning it was coming. That is the ongoing reality of living on the Ring of Fire, and it is a reality this planet has shown no intention of pausing anytime soon. Stay informed, stay genuinely prepared, rather than just aware, and stay with us as we continue following this story in the days ahead.